It's called a loss. Hello?
Welcome, everybody, to It's Called a Dragonlance, a brand new podcast. Last year marked the 40th year anniversary of the first Dragonlance novel by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. This is a series of books that defined Dungeons & Dragons for decades, and launched dozens upon dozens of spin-off novels. This podcast will be sort of a Dragonlance book club, in which we read through the novels together, and we reconvene every 2 weeks to discuss what we've read. This week is mainly the introduction episode, so we're just covering the prologue. No need to stop the video and read unless you really want to. We will be pretty thorough in our summary section. This way, you have 2 weeks to grab yourself a copy of Dragons of Autumn Twilight and get those first few chapters read. After this episode, though, we assume that you're following along in the book with us, or that you've read the Dragonlance Chronicles sometime before now. Chapters to be read will be announced at the end of every episode, and also in my Discord server. Links for that will be in the description on all platforms. We've also got affiliate links to buy the books down there as well. Obviously, if you want to support the pod, pick up your copy through those links as it helps keep the lights on for us. There's a big Dragonlance omnibus that's coming out very soon. You can even pre-order it. It might be out now, depending on when we release this episode, and it is probably your best shot at buying a physical copy. And using our link kicks $1 our way. Now, that's all the business stuff finished. Let me introduce myself and my co-hosts. Hi, I'm William SRD, and this right here is my good buddy and my partner of my Patreon podcast, the SRD Bags. He's an executive ultra super producer lord for life of the Handful of Nerds actual play. It's Austin co-host, everybody.
Hello!
Yay. Hello, Austin. I've stylized your name. You always go by Austin or co-host. I've just decided you're Austin co-host now.
Honestly, that works for me. Yeah. Hi, I'm Austin. I've known Will for, like a few years? At least
it has been. Yeah.
2-3 years at this point. First and foremost, I'm sorry.
It's been lovely. It's been lovely. He's been improving his Austin skills every year.
I know, it's terrible. It's downhill from here. I'm terrible at fucking introducing myself and not swearing. I'm really bad at that.
Well, at this point, 30 seconds have probably passed, so you can probably swear now.
Well, yeah, but for all the little children that might be watching the podcast, I don't want them to hear foul language or something.
Teach them, Austin. Teach them. Do not deny them the knowledge that they seek.
Yeah, well, the grim darkness of a far future of 2025, the internet exists. People have heard much worse than the F word. So, anyways, I've been a fan of Dungeons & Dragons since I was a literal child, at about 20 years plus at this point. I got started with 3.5 back in the day, so I never really got into Dragonlance because that wasn't super big in my area, but I did play a lot of Eberron back in the day.
Fantastic. My other co-host here is the creator of the Auntie Haunty YouTube channel, a veteran geek who survived being goth in the 90s, a resident expert on all things grognard, and a one-woman liaison between D&D YouTube and the VTuber streamers. It's Auntie Haunty.
Hello. Hi. Yes, I did survive being a goth. I survived being a lot of things in the 90s. My goodness. Hello. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me. I've been a big Dragonlance nerd for ages, pretty much. Since I was a teenager or child, which was about 30 something plus years ago, 40 almost. Oh, good lord, yeah, 30 years ago, I think.
I didn't want to do the cruelty to you of making you calculate. You did that on your own.
No, yeah, 31. What? God, no, I read it when I was 11. Sorry, yeah, no, God, 33 years ago almost. Was when I first read Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and it's what sort of. I was already a nerd and into fantasy stuff, but it's what really, I think, cemented the deal, because all of a sudden I became a nerd who read nerd books. And I had a stack of them in my locker at school.
I think that was pretty similar for me. I was kind of in that like just exiting elementary school kind of era, and you know, my friends and I, we were all hungry for whatever fantasy books were in the library, and we'd read them all. And we'd read this one called Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and there were only like 5 fantasy books, so we'd all read it like 3 times. We didn't have any of the sequels on display. None of us had any idea that it was connected to Dungeons and Dragons at all.
Right.
And yeah, we reread it and reread it and reread it, and then eventually I like went, hey, you know, it says there's sequels, and then I started asking my mom for sequels. And then there were so many Dragonlance books that my friends and I started to become almost a Dragonlance book club. And like one of us would have our mom buy one book, they would read it, and then they'd like pass it to all of us. Yeah, so it was very no one had a real Dragonlance collection. We were all just taking turns with the books and stuff. It was very fun. And Dragonlance was a very meaningful series for me. It was probably the first like full fantasy series that I had read. And yeah, it's got so much nostalgia for me. And part of why I wanted to do this pod is that, you know, I get asked a lot to summarize on my YouTube channel, like what makes different parts of the TTRPG hobby great. And the simple fact of the matter is that Dragonlance is so much in my distant memory that I don't really remember what makes Dragonlance great. And so I kind of got to do a reread. And I think we've got a really cool cast here today, because we've got myself, who loved Dragonlance but remembers very little. We have you, who has a lot more like adult memories, fully formed memories of Dragonlance.
Yes.
And we have Austin, who is a complete beginner. So we get kind of the full spectrum here.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Besides the Prologue, the only thing I know about Dragonlance came from Soulforged by Blind Guardian.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Fucking great song.
There's like little references to Dragonlance all over the world that you just like come across and not realize it, because it was so influential.
Oh yeah. There's even a musical in Russia.
There was a kid in my school named Raceland.
No
shit.
Wow.
Yeah, seriously.
I imagine that kid did not get beat up a lot.
Well, I mean, the other kids didn't know it was nerd shit. Only me.
Wow.
Fair,
of all the characters to name your kid after, too, the brooding teenager, the sullen brooding jerk of the group. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
So before we get into everything else, M, as our resident nerd expert, our nerd history expert, are you able to give us just our nerd storian? Would you be able to give us a quick history lesson on what Dragonlance is and like what it did in the hobby?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, in the ye old days of Dungeons and Dragons, it was just a game. Obviously, it didn't have all of the tie-in fiction and everything else. And if you were hungry for Dragonlance, or not Dragonlance, if you were hungry for Dungeons and Dragons fiction, you had to, you know, make it up yourself with your friends around a table. And at some point, Tracy Hickman and his wife Laura decided that they were going to submit an adventure module to Dungeons and Dragons, to TSR, out in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. And they submitted. They spent a lot of time working on this adventure, where they kind of conceived of a world based on a number of influencing factors from their own lives and their own interests. And TSR loved it, in part because it answered, you know, the question of why are there so many dungeons and not so many dragons in the game. And they really enjoyed it, and they published it and released it, and it did well. it did pretty well. It was probably the only Dragonlance adventure module to do super well, but it also then triggered interest in getting some novels written. And so they brought Margaret Weiss on board to write a novelization of the adventure. along with Tracy as sort of a contributing author. And they did. And they wrote Dragons of Autumn Twilight, which was based on the events of the first adventure module. And the rest is history with, subsequent novels following subsequent modules. Although I would say personally that the novels deviate a lot from the adventures, especially as they go on. They cease to become one-to-one representations of the events of the book or even of the characters. Mm-hmm. And personally, I think most of history remembers the novels far more kindly than it remembers the adventure modules.
That makes sense.
But yeah.
And one thing I've heard levied against the novels almost as a point of criticism, or not even at the novels, but so much of how Dragonlance as a D&D setting worked, is that the novels made the world feel like it belonged to the characters in the novels, and you kind of just felt like a guest when you were playing the TTRPG. So there wasn't quite the synergy there.
There is that was definitely a big part of it. It was one of the first. I think a number of adventure modules, if I'm remembering correctly, it's a little bit before my time, but I believe that several adventure modules had already toyed with the idea of making optional pre-generated characters available to players who didn't know how to generate characters themselves or something. But Dragonlance really leaned in hard to the pre-generated character concept, and so you kind of were handed a cast of characters who were very, very tightly woven into the story, which worked really well for the first adventure. It was very novel, but it wound up, I think, kind of constricting subsequent adventure modules, making them feel more and more like railroads and less like, living, breathing adventures that you get to play through with your friends, your own way. So that was a big part of it. And I think it's why it ended up working so well with the novels. And in fact, even in my early teen years, 11, 12, 13, when I really wanted to run these adventures for friends, I kept coming back to this conclusion that the story of the world of Dragonlance was so thoroughly told and told so well by the novels that it actually kind of created an obstacle to running it as an adventure. Because either you have to essentially say none of these characters exist, in which case you're essentially rewriting the story from scratch, or they exist and the player characters are going to, take a back seat and sort of as you say, be guest stars in someone else's much bigger grand story. So it's kind of like Lord of the Rings. Like if you ran Lord of the Rings as a D&D adventure, but the Fellowship were all there doing their thing. True. It's like, well, what events of consequence are you going through? Yeah, they go through the most important parts of the whole story, So
wasn't there a whole video game on Lord of the Rings where you're just chasing the Fellowship?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I cannot remember what it is called, but I think that does exist.
And it even happens in the Dragonlance video games where there's moments where they're there's the video game, all of a sudden it's and look, it's Caramon. Wow. Yeah. And you're okay. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
he's here to save you.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, world. I needed a hero. I didn't want to play one.
Yeah, so historically, the novels definitely outperformed the games, and in fact, TSR really didn't want to do the novels at first. The Dragonlance team really had to push for it, and after the novel did so well, Dragons of Autumn Twilight did so well at the bookstores. TSR was like, we need more novels. We need as many as you can give us. And the adventure modules kind of like at some point even Tracy Hickman stops working on them because it's just they became less and less important.
Yeah.
And the next tabletop book of importance would actually just be the Dragonlance Adventures book, which was the setting guide.
And I've got a stat here. In terms of Dragonlance novels, there are over 190 of them.
Yes.
God damn.
It goes without saying, we are not reading every Dragonlance novel on this podcast. Yeah. We do.
To be fair.
Yeah,
many of them are I said, to be fair, many of them are anthologies of short stories.
That's true. which maybe we'll dive into those for like guest star episodes and stuff. I don't know.
Mm.
But yeah, so our intention on this pod is we're going to read Dragonlance Chronicles and then, just kind of see where everyone's feeling. We might cover more Dragonlance stuff. We might tackle other like tabletop tangential novels like Eisenhorn's kind of the big one we're discussing. But yeah, let us know in the comments of whatever platform you're on what you think of the ideas.
I'm still pulling for Caiaphas Cain, but that's just me.
I'm just pulling for all 190 Dragonlance books.
We could do that,
literally
maybe.
have so
we've
many other
married
things to do.
We have married the brand to Dragonlance already, so
That's why I'm pretty sure like the brand, the show is called a Lance, and then
the series it's called a Dragonlance. Yeah, there's a distinction.
So we need a lance. We can read stories with that, but they have to involve lances.
Well, I mean, technically for 40K, they have las weapons and those lance through people. It works. Don't read too far into it.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's quite difficult to explain just how influential Dragonlance was. It struck like way far outside of just people who played D&D, and it brought a lot of people into the hobby. Again, my friend group, we read so many Dragonlance novels, and I didn't realize until I was already an adult looking at that in retrospect that like, hey, those were D&D novels.
Yeah. It's true. I only knew because I was so steeped in Dungeons and Dragons at that time, and for me it was the era of second edition. So I had box set upon box set of setting guides, and they always put the nice logo right at the top of the novels to let you know which campaign setting the novel tied into. And of course, it was also the days before Amazon, so I could just walk into a bookstore at the mall, and there would be shelves of D&D novels right above the D&D books, and so made shopping for books really, really easy at the time.
Yeah.
Okay,
I could always walk in and find the next Dragonlance novel, of which there were many.
When I was prepping for this, I remembered that there were those new Dragonlance novels that had come out last year. And I decided to just like walk through chapters and see if I could find it anywhere. And it really struck me how when I was young, you'd go to the fantasy section and there'd be like 2 entire bookshelves full of Dragonlance novels. It was like a third of the fantasy section. And going in there now, I couldn't even find the new ones. There's no Dragonlance in bookstores anymore. It actually kind of hurt. I was quite sad.
Yes.
Will. It's not like the fantasy genre is slowly being undertaken in a lot of the bookstores I've been into.
Yeah, it's a lot smaller than it used to be, too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so much smaller. But anyways, let's not be downers here.
That's true. We've got a whole Dragonlance to get ahead of us. So do you guys have anything else we want to do in this little bit of the prologue, or do we want to get into the chapter summary?
Well, let's get into it.
The book opens with the Canticle of the Dragon, an in-universe poem that outlines the broad history of the world of Krynn. It describes Krynn when it was a young world. 3 moons emerged from the lap of the forest, accompanied by dragons seeking to conquer the world. A mighty hero named Huma Lightbringer, the knight of a nation called Solamnia, emerged to battle the dragons. In the Kalkist Mountains, Huma had great smiths forge dragon lances that would allow mortals to fight the invaders. With the help of the god Paladin, Huma bested the Queen of Darkness herself and banished her and her ilk from the plane. A new age began in the aftermath, called the Age of Might. The forces of evil had been so thoroughly defeated that a nation of light called Istar came to dominate most of the world. The king priest of Istar, not seeing the Golden Age for what it was, sought to eradicate all sin from the world, and began researching a way to bring the gods to Krynn to help him in his goal. Instead, what he summoned was described as a mountain of fire falling from the sky, destroying Istar and cutting Kryn off from the gods forever. What followed is the current era, the Age of Despair. The prologue picks up from the point of view of a red-haired barmaid called Tika Whalen, who prepares the Inn of the Last Home to open for business. She discusses the state of the business with her adopted father, Otik. The town, called Solus, built at the tops of vast trees, appears to be on edge when a recently arrived High Theocrat begins taking control of the village. The High Theocrat and his guards have clearly been running things to the ground and scaring everyone, all in the name of the new gods that they have been evangelizing about. The times are dark, but at least it's driving people to the tavern. An old bearded man arrives, acting strangely. Despite Tika's protests, the old man begins rearranging a table to set up for a party, and then curiously chooses to sit somewhere completely different. Okay, we can now discuss. Let's stick right now to the Canticle of the Dragon. How are we feeling about the Canticle, you guys?
I
mean, Austin, yeah, you're new, so your first impression. Yeah.
I have come from reading a lot of Tolkien growing up, and I've always loved poems and songs in my stories. It's always been a good time for me.
Mm-hmm.
So I enjoyed it thoroughly. I'm not gonna lie. But that is because I'm a sucker for that kind of stuff.
It does have a little bit more of a dark fantasy theme than you'd expect, with like the gods are gone, the Age of Light was corrupted, or Age of Might, I guess, but you know, the Kingdom of Light being corrupted and destroying the world. It is kind of a darker tone than you would expect from a lot of this era.
From a high fantasy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's true. You know, it's interesting because like it's also that kind of like time of darkness is really a vibe that I only pick up on now as an adult whenever I go back and reread things. At the time as a kid, I was just kind of in my head. It was still just like a normal fantasy world, and there's these wacky fake religion dudes wandering around being jerks. But like that wasn't like didn't ring to me as particularly important because the story kicks off so quickly.
Yeah, I didn't know what a High Theocrat was. I was like, haha, funny goblin title.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, you know.
Which like as a grown up and an adult now, you know, because those are different. Trust me, I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
It's true.
I know what a High Theocrat is, and that struck me as super interesting, and like, you know, oh no, these people are scared that there's a fucking high priest walking around downtown.
Yeah. And I think it, you know, one of the critiques that sometimes Dragonlance has levied against it is that it's very stock fantasy. But, I mean, already right in minute one in this Canticle, it's talking about how, you know, the great hero already won. Huma Lightbringer won. And we're living in, like, the corrupted aftermath of the heroes winning.
Right.
And that I think is already an interesting subversion.
Absolutely.
Well, something too that I think is very interesting about opening the book with the Canticle is like, so of course, you know, I'd said earlier that that Tracy and his wife were putting various influences from their own lives into the stories, and of course, and we know that they are practicing Mormons, and so a lot of their faith sort of ends up, and also in their approach to faith ends up in the stories. And a Canticle, of course, is a religious song. And so I think it's kind of neat. I don't know how meta it was meant to be on the part of Margaret and Tracy, but I do know that it's just pretty nifty that they open with an in-world religious song to open a story in a world where the practicing of that religion, the worship of the true gods, has been forbidden, like in all of the lands that people live in. So it's kind of like
interesting, yeah.
It's a neat little juxtaposition. It's like, here's the first words you read are from the game's in-world religion, or from the book's in-world religion.
Yeah,
and now we're going to show you this world where singing it would be illegal.
Well, and we're we already see that there's kind of a complex understanding and analysis of just the concept of religion, because it presents, the gods are good, but the way humans worship is deeply flawed. Like the king priest of Istar attempted to eradicate all sin and just absolutely brought down the wrath of the gods and cut them off from humanity forever. It's quite complex.
Yeah.
I guess, shall we get into the rest of the prologue with Tika Whalen?
Let's.
Yeah.
So, M, this is your space we're giving you right here.
Oh man.
to talk about Tika Whalen. And by the way, to the listeners, we're gonna mess up a bunch and call Auntie Haunty M. That's the same person. When I say M, I mean Auntie Haunty.
Yes.
And when I say Auntie Haunty, I mean M.
Yes.
Yes. No. I am, of course, a medium channeling the ghost of Auntie. Many people know. So the prologue starts with this sort of short story of this old man, like as you'd sort of described, coming into the inn of the last home. And something that I really like about it is how it introduces several characters who are actually like super consequential to the story, but they won't be super consequential to the story right away. Right? They are kind of like presented as side characters. They're just members of the supporting cast at first, but each one of them will come back in some, come back in the story to a position of importance in some way or another, to varying degrees, of course. And of course, it's Tika that we're introduced to very, 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 very first character, and she's always been the. I have to say it this way. Let's ignore that she's still essentially kind of a teenager, but this is how she's presented in the book. She's presented as like the hottie of the Dragonlance universe.
Right.
Yeah. She's the romantic. She's been the romantic interest, or will be the romantic interest of several main characters. She's very feisty. She's your feisty buxom redheaded tavern maid.
Yeah.
And she it's no surprise she's the one who doesn't take too well to this wacky old man stepping inside and causing a little bit of havoc with the furniture.
And to both Austin and the listeners, if you've never read Dragonlance before, I just make some space for M and I just having our like 11-year-old crushes return from when we were children. Just save some space. Once Lorana gets in, it's over. Okay.
I'm sorry. Yeah. It's Kittyara for me.
Oh, Kittyara for you. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are definitely names, 100%.
Yeah, yep. I mean, Lorana, I don't think is going to get up to too much in book 1, but once we hit book 2, fans, I'm going to get obnoxious.
It's kind of interesting to me that their dialogue again also isn't particularly consequential. It's just setting up the world, right? She's just talking about like, oh, I wish that the weather was warmer. People are so grumpy. People aren't tipping. People are just really nervous. I drop a glass and suddenly everybody's like pulling their weapons out and freaking out. It's just there to really, I think, establish how stressed everyone is. And I can definitely, following certain global events can in real life can empathize a lot more with the setup now than I think I used to.
Yes.
Oh boy, howdy.
Yeah.
There was a time when everybody was nervous and jumped at every cleared throat and weren't tipping very much.
Yeah.
So,
Anyways, we're not here to be a downer.
And then mood, an old man, a window licker, he would be called, comes in, tries to enter before the business is even open, and then the motherfucker starts moving the furniture and the tables around.
Yep.
Yeah, an old man who is clearly not a wizard.
He comes
Definitely
in and
not
he's
a
like,
wizard.
I'm really tired from all those stairs. Let me drag these tables everywhere.
Yes. Well, it's interesting that you say he's not a wizard, Austin, because something that we will find later in the book is that much like worship of the gods, and thus we can assume from a D&D perspective, clerics and priests is suppressed, right? So too is wizardry in this world. So he may be an old man wearing robes walking into a tavern, but no one is going to assume that he is a wizard.
Yes, these things are rare and not widely known.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
yes,
just
indeed.
assuming that he was a wizard because he didn't walk up the stairs.
Right. Yeah, no, that is true.
Yeah.
He says that moment there. Odic's like, he had a long climb up here. Give him a seat, Tika. Stop being a bitch.
And he's like,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
the old man is like, what do you mean?
stairs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, all of them stairs
Right.
I've been walking up. Yep, love walking
Yeah,
upstairs.
my goodness.
Yeah. And then I love how he begins setting up for the party, and he's clearly a little confused. He's got like a vision, probably a literal vision of how he wants this to be. And he's like, wait, I don't understand. There's no shadow in that corner. Why not?
Yeah.
Oh, because it's not night yet. Oh, right. I got to wait.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that's this conversation with Tika. She's like, he tells her like, but there will be. Ah.
Yes, the broody dark shadow corner for a broody dark
Yes.
hero. I can almost guarantee it. I'm putting money
Yep.
down.
So not only did he show up and start rearranging the furniture for a party, but that he didn't tell them about in advance, but it's a party that is still many, many hours away.
Yeah.
Indeed.
After moving the table, that has always been in that one spot, but now it's got to move somewhere else because he's a crazy old wizard man.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
You just got to let the crazy old wizard man, be a window licker and then move the tables.
Yeah.
At my tender age, if I had an old man appear in my tavern that was up 40 feet into the air without, walking up the stairs, I'm just going to let him do whatever he wants.
That's fair.
It's
He's not
true.
hurting anybody.
Especially when he can cast prestidigitation without looking, causing a grease fire in the kitchen.
Indeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
So actually that's something interesting that you mentioned, that the tavern is, I don't think we've mentioned that the tavern is 40 feet in the air yet, because it's of course built into a tree. And we get a lot of description of that here. You want to talk about that, Austin?
Absolutely,
how'd you feel about
I
the
do.
town?
I love the description of a town. This mostly comes back from when I was a child playing Pokemon. Sapphire and Ruby. One of my favorite towns to go through was the treetop one. I just always liked the concept of cities being built inside massive trees.
Mm-hmm.
It is really cool to me, and I also like the fact that they accounted for, well, you're not going to put your blacksmith shop inside of a tree. That's how you burn down the forest.
Yeah.
So
I always liked Solus. It's one of those like A-tier starter towns. It's not just a generic fantasy town. It's built in trees. It's nice.
Mm-hmm. And then they go into the detail, further into detail of the fireplace in the tavern, because it's a tavern. You're going to have a fireplace. It's dwarf craftsmanship. It's made out of stone. It's very sturdy, as to not risk burning down the tree, because they do say it's super important that they don't burn wood that came from the trees that built up the city, which screams about, there are definitely trade agreements because you've got to get wood from somewhere else, I assume, to come in because you don't want to cut down your own forest.
So got a whole economy built.
Yeah,
that is part of it.
And I'm just a sucker for an implied economy without going into an overloading of detail on how trade routes work.
Indeed.
Well, I think also it's a specific tree that they aren't going to use wood from, which are these Valenwood trees, which are sort of they're like somewhere between, I guess, like sequoias and oak trees, right? Like they're painted. They're always depicted visually on the book covers and everything as oak trees, essentially, with like really nice, not oaky leaves, closer to maybe maple leaves or something. But they're enormous, right? They have to be large enough to support whole houses and a whole village.
right?
The ye old fantasy giant tree.
And for
But there are,
both
of course, other
listeners
trees
and
around,
for
too.
Austin, who is new to the series, if you want to see what the town of Solus looks like, it's probably one of the most painted and drawn things in Dragonlance. I believe it's one of the most popular, like one of the most common book covers on Dragons of Autumn Twilight is them like
Mhm.
standing in front of Solus. So if you want to visualize it, or if you need to see it to picture it, it's out there very easily. Just Dragonlance Solus into Google, and you will have everything just right there.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
Yeah, so I did the Google thing because that's what I do with my adult life, and it is so pretty.
It's very
Mhm.
pretty.
And one thing I would like to mention about the town before we move on
Yeah.
is the Valenwood trees themselves. This is just a fun little tidbit, but they're for a long time. Of course, I was a child, and I thought that a Valenwood tree was like ironwood. Like it's actually like ironwood is actually a type of tree, right? It's not necessarily the exact same tree as the ironwood trees of D&D, because in D&D, ironwood is supposed to be as hard as metal, but and that's not the case in real life. But Valenwood trees, of course, are purely a fantasy tree. And just a fun little note is that Valen, the wood, they use 2 L's in the name, so I'm not 100% sure on this. But the word Valen from English actually means brave or strong. And so these are essentially like brave trees and strong trees, right? Like essentially like hero trees, really, when you think about the meaning of the word, which is always a little note that I like about their use in the setting. It's like, not only is this the town where the story is going to begin, but even the trees themselves are named after this sort of element of like courageous heroism.
Yeah.
And,
Hell yeah.
So it's a good starting point for the story.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last thing I think we said we wanted to discuss here was the map.
Yes. Oh god, I
yes,
love
the map.
maps.
You guys love maps. I also love a good fantasy map.
Yep.
What do we think of this one?
I'm a fan.
I like it. I personally have issues with it, but this is because I took one too many geography courses, and there is nothing for me to determine like the size of anything here.
Yeah,
Which
I
is
agree.
fine
I think
with
it's a bit muddy so
Yeah.
far.
Let me counter that though with it's clearly drawn like with the parchment edges and everything. Can you guys hear those sirens in the background? Should I wait?
Oh, absolutely, I can hear them.
Yeah, let's
I'll
wait
wait until right. So the map is depicted as on parchment, right? They draw the broken edges of the parchment even as part of the map. And so it's definitely meant to be an in-world map. And so it's, we have to think about it in terms of like medieval maps, right? Those things were not accurate to our current understandings of maps.
Yeah.
But they were relatively accurate to how people understood and used maps in their day, right? They were presenting a different type of information, general directions, general placement, and in fact, as we'll see later on as the novels progress, and whenever we're treated to the perspective of one of the heroes of the Lance, we'll actually see that this question of maps is one that comes up fairly often in Dragonlance. Not necessarily because the maps don't need or aren't able to provide them the information they want, but because one of the characters is going to be very, very it's his pet topic. Is map making. And so it'll come up a lot. So I counter your this doesn't give me scale, this doesn't give me this, is like it's with the idea that it's not supposed to.
That is true.
No, and I don't disagree. It's just one thing I really like, but I'm a weird fucking nerd. So
well
the
you're
one
in
thing
luck,
I do
Austin,
like
because there
the one thing I do like is even here in just this little prologue, we've already like been given a little bit of comparison to stuff on the map. We know Solus. We know where that is now. We see it's kind of the most northernmost part of this map. And
it's
we
near a
also
lake.
have and we also get mentioned Haven, and that's like the big town in the region. That's where the big taverns are that Tika doesn't know about.
Right.
So we already have a little bit more clarifying information. These places on the map aren't just going to be like forgotten about.
Yeah,
Indeed.
which I like.
And Austin, if you do crave proper maps, there's always the Dragonlance Atlas. Which was a book that they had made. They contracted a proper cartographer to make maps for all of the locations in the Dragonlance games. And
man.
But that sounds like it costs money I don't have. Anyways, I'll be right back. I gotta go Google something.
Fantastic. Okay, I think we're good to close things up here. This will be a pretty short one, being that we've only got just the prologue to deal with.
It's just the introduction, right?
Indeed.
Well, I suppose we can go. There is the page, the unlikely group of heroes. We're given the dramatis personae right there next to the map.
I suppose we are.
If we want to talk about that, or we're going to be introduced to them all in the next chapter. So,
I think let's save them for the next chapter.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We could go over the copyright information. I'm sure that there's some interesting lore we could plumb from the Library of Congress catalog card number. It's 9965602 if we're ever in a post-apocalypse and someone is raiding the Library of Congress, by the way, and you need that information. Just it's there for you now.
Well, thank you. I did need that. Not related to this at all, but for something else.
Yeah. So for the listeners, there was actually a cut right there. We spent around 3 hours discussing the copyright information. We felt like we had too much to say on it, so it'll be its own
it was
episode.
A little dry as well. Yeah, it needs its own whole.
That's our show, everybody. See you in 2 weeks when we will be covering chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So make sure you've got those ones read. Please get your copy through the links below if you don't already have one on hand. Please drop a comment on whichever platform you're on if you have any thoughts to the prologue. Once we've built up the listener base, we might end up doing a little mailbag section. Might be every episode, might be once a season, but we will discuss what you guys think of the book and of the chapters. And while you're on that, please like the pod and give us a subscribe or follow. If you're listening on any other platform, hike on out to my Discord and drop us your comment there in the chapter channels. See you in 2 weeks, everybody, and we hope to see you as the story continues. Say goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye, everybody.
What an old joke.